Why was everyone staring at the girl with the duffel bag? Sarah Martinez stepped off the bus at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, clutching worn canvas straps like they were the only real things in the world. 28 years old, baby face, nervous smile. She looked like someone's little sister who'd gotten lost on the way to freshman orientation. The morning sun caught her small frame, making her seem even more out of place among the towering soldiers who moved with that easy confidence that only comes from real experience. She kept her head down, tried to blend in, tried to disappear. It was a skill she'd perfected over the years. Sergeant Thompson watched her stumble slightly as she adjusted the bag. Another fresh recruit, he muttered to the private beside him. Looks like she's never seen the inside of a barracks, let alone a battlefield. The words carried on the Kentucky breeze. Sarah heard them. She always heard them, but she didn't react, couldn't afford to, not yet. The intake officer was a stern-faced woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too many young soldiers come through her door. She barely glanced up from her clipboard. Name: Sarah Martinez, ma'am. Her voice was soft but clear. Specialty: combat medic, ma'am. The officer's eyebrows raised slightly. Combat medics were respected. Important. But looking at this girl, this child with the oversized uniform and uncertain posture, she seemed better suited for filing paperwork than saving lives under fire. Previous deployments, the question hung in the air. Sarah hesitated just a moment, just long enough to make the officer look up. Multiple, ma'am. How many is multiple, soldier? 5 tour, ma'am. 3 in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. The clipboard nearly slipped from the officer's hands. She looked up sharply, studying Sarah's face with new interest. New suspicion. 5 tour was exceptional. 5 tour was what career soldiers accumulated over a decade. Most people didn't survive that many deployments, especially not someone who looked like they still needed permission to stay out past curfew. Age, the officer asked, though it wasn't on her standard questions. 28, ma'am. The math didn't add up. Sarah would have had to enlist straight out of high school and deploy almost immediately. Back-to-back tour. No breaks, no safety, no time to be young. The officer made a note on her file, marked it for supervisor review. Something wasn't right here. Either this girl was lying or there was a story no one had bothered to ask about. Word spread through the base like wildfire. The new medic claimed 5 deployments but looked like she'd never held anything heavier than a textbook. Soldiers gathered in small groups during smoke breaks, whispering, laughing, placing bets on how long she'd last in training exercises. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran with scars running down his left arm like a roadmap of combat, shook his head as he watched Sarah struggle with her oversized duffel bag. Command must be getting desperate, he told his squad. 5 tore my ass. She probably got those stories from watching war movies. But Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the base's chief medical officer, had a different reaction when she reviewed Sarah's file that afternoon. Something about the young woman's medical training records didn't match her appearance. The certifications were legitimate, real. The skills assessments were off the charts, and her psychological evaluations showed patterns consistent with extensive combat exposure, patterns that couldn't be faked. There's more to this one than meets the eye, Dr. Walsh told her assistant. Her trauma response scores are higher than soldiers I've seen with documented PTSD. And look at these medical procedure certifications. You don't get training in battlefield amputation and emergency thoracotomy from sitting in a classroom. You get them from desperate moments when textbook medicine isn't enough. That evening, Sarah sat alone in the mess hall. She picked at her food while conversations buzzed around her like insects. She'd grown accustomed to the skeptical looks, the whispered comments, the sideways glances. It happened at every new assignment, every single time. Her appearance had always been both a blessing and a curse. Enemies underestimated her. That had saved her life more than once. But allies doubted her too. And that made every new posting an uphill battle. She had to fight before the real battles even began. A young private named Jackson approached her table. His face was flushed with embarrassment. "Ma'am, I know this might sound rude, but some of the guys are wondering." He paused. "They're saying you might be exaggerating about your deployments." "Not that I believe them," he added quickly. "It's just that you look so young." Sarah finished for him, not unkindly. "I get that a lot. It's not just that, ma'am. You seem so normal. The other combat vets, they have this look in their eyes, like they've seen things, but you just seem." Sarah set down her fork, looked directly at Jackson. For just a moment her carefully maintained facade slipped, and he caught a glimpse of something deeper in her dark eyes, something old, something that made him unconsciously step back. "I've seen things too, Private," she said quietly. "I just choose not to wear them on my face." That night, unable to sleep, Sarah walked the perimeter of the base. The Kentucky night was peaceful, a stark contrast to the sleepless nights she'd spent in far more dangerous places. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through old messages, stopped at one from her former squad leader in Afghanistan. "Martinez, heard you're stateside again. Try not to scare the new recruits with your baby face. Remember, they don't know what you're made of yet. Give them time to figure it out. Stay safe, little warrior." She smiled sadly at the message. Captain Morgan had been killed by an IED 3 months after sending it. He was one of too many good soldiers she'd lost over the years. Each deployment had taken pieces of her, but she'd learned to hide the damage well, learned to smile when people expected innocence, learned to stay quiet when they doubted her, because proving yourself got exhausting after the first 100 times. A noise from the medical facility caught her attention. Through the windows, she could see Dr. Walsh still working late, reviewing files under harsh fluorescent lights. Sarah recognized the dedication. Military medicine never slept, and neither did the people responsible for keeping soldiers alive. As she turned to head back to her quarters, Sarah caught her reflection in a darkened window. The face that stared back at her looked impossibly young, unmarked by the horrors she'd witnessed, the lives she'd fought to save, the ones she'd lost. It was a face that had fooled enemies and allies alike, a perfect disguise that had served her well in the field but made her journey in the military a constant battle for credibility. Tomorrow would bring training exercises with soldiers who doubted her abilities. They'd test her, push her, wait for her to crack and reveal herself as the fraud they believed her to be. Sarah had been through this routine dozens of times before. She knew exactly how it would play out. What they didn't know yet was that beneath her youthful appearance and quiet demeanor lay the heart of a warrior who had earned every one of her decorations the hardest way possible. 5 Purple Hearts didn't lie, even if the person wearing them looked too innocent to have earned them. But there was something else they didn't know, something Sarah hadn't told anyone yet, something that kept her awake on peaceful nights like this one, a secret that weighed heavier than any medal ever could. Could she really handle another deployment if they asked? The morning alarm shrieked through the barracks at 0500 hours. Sarah was already awake. She'd been staring at the ceiling for the past hour, her internal clock still adjusting to peaceful sleep after months of combat zones where rest came in 30-minute intervals. Around her, soldiers groaned and stumbled out of their bunks, but Sarah moved with quiet efficiency, making her bed with military precision, every corner crisp, every fold exact, muscle memory from years of doing it in the dark. "Rise and shine, Martinez," called Corporal Stevens, a bulky man with arms like tree trunks. "Hope you're ready for some real training today, not whatever they taught you in basic." Sarah didn't respond, simply laced her boots and headed for morning formation. She'd learned long ago that action spoke louder than words, especially when people had already made up their minds about you. The first exercise was a 15-mile march with full packs. Sarah shouldered her gear without complaint, though the weight seemed to dwarf her small frame. Sergeant Rodriguez watched with barely concealed amusement as she adjusted her straps. "Martinez, you sure you can handle that pack? It's not too late to request a desk assignment." The comment earned chuckles from nearby soldiers. "I'll manage, Sergeant," Sarah replied simply. The march began at dawn, winding through Kentucky's rolling hills and dense forests. Within the first mile, the soldiers had naturally spread out according to their fitness levels. The strongest and most experienced took the lead, Stragglers brought up the rear. Sarah found herself in the middle of the pack, not struggling, not excelling, just moving forward with steady determination. But something was different about the way she walked. While other soldiers shifted their weight and adjusted their packs, Sarah maintained perfect posture. Her breathing was controlled, measured. She wasn't just carrying the weight, she was one with it, like the pack was part of her body. By mile 5, some of the soldiers who'd started strong were beginning to fade. Heavy breathing, red faces, stumbling steps. Sarah remained consistent. Her pace never changed. Her form never broke. Sergeant Rodriguez noticed. He'd seen plenty of recruits try to prove themselves on these marches. Most burned out by mile 8, pushed too hard, too fast, too desperate to impress. But Martinez wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just moving. Like she'd done this 1,000 times before, which, if her records were accurate, she had. By mile 10, Sarah had quietly moved toward the front of the formation, not because she was racing, but because her steady pace had outlasted the others' initial burst of speed. Corporal Stevens, who'd mocked her that morning, was now struggling several yards behind. His face was purple, his breath coming in gasps. "How the hell is she still going?" he muttered to another soldier. "She's half my size." Mile 12 brought them up a steep incline. This was where marches usually broke soldiers, where pride gave way to physical reality, where the strong were separated from the pretenders. Sarah attacked the hill with the same measured pace she'd maintained all morning. No change in breathing, no visible strain, just one foot in front of the other. The same way she'd climbed mountains in Afghanistan, the same way she'd marched through Iraqi deserts, the same way she'd moved toward danger when everyone else was running away. She crested the hill first, not by much, but first, and she wasn't gasping for air or bent over her knees. She was standing, waiting, watching as the others staggered up behind her. Sergeant Rodriguez reached the top third. He stared at Sarah with a mixture of surprise and something that might have been respect. "That's good work, Martinez," he said, trying to sound casual, but his eyes told a different story. The march ended back at base. 15 miles completed. Sarah's uniform was soaked with sweat. Her face was flushed, but she walked into formation with her head high. Around her, soldiers who'd started the day mocking her were now silent. Some looked confused, others looked impressed, a few looked embarrassed. In the barracks afterward, conversations shifted. "Did you see her on that hill? She didn't even slow down. Maybe she's not lying about those deployments. That pack weighed almost as much as she does. How did she carry it that far?" Sarah heard the whispers as she cleaned her gear, but she didn't engage, didn't gloat, didn't explain. She just did what she'd come here to do, show them who she was without saying a word. But the real test came 2 days later, during combat medical training exercises. This was where medics proved their worth, where technical knowledge met practical application, where seconds determined life or death. The scenario was designed to be overwhelming: multiple casualties, limited resources, chaos simulation. Dr. Walsh observed from the sidelines, taking notes, watching how the new medics handled pressure. The exercise began with controlled pandemonium: smoke machines, loudspeakers blaring explosion sounds, instructors shouting conflicting orders, actors playing wounded soldiers screaming for help. Most medics froze for at least a few seconds, overwhelmed by the sensory assault, trying to process too much information at once. Sarah didn't freeze, she moved. Her eyes swept the scene in less than 2 seconds, categorizing injuries, calculating priorities, planning her approach. She went straight to the casualty with arterial bleeding, the one everyone else had overlooked because he wasn't screaming. The quiet ones die first. She'd learned that lesson in Helmand Province, watching a soldier bleed out while everyone else treated the noisy casualties with less critical injuries. Her hands moved with practiced precision, applying pressure, securing a tourniquet, calling for supplies without looking up. She worked in complete focus, the chaos around her fading into background noise. This wasn't training for Sarah. This was Tuesday in Kandahar. This was a convoy ambush outside Mosul. This was every nightmare she'd lived through compressed into a teaching moment. She moved to the second casualty, sucking chest wound. She sealed it with practiced efficiency. Then to the third, possible spinal injury. She immobilized him properly, quickly, every movement economical, nothing wasted. While other medics were still trying to figure out where to start, Sarah had already triaged and treated 3 critical patients. Dr. Walsh's pen stopped moving. She was no longer taking notes. She was just watching. This wasn't the performance of someone fresh out of medical school. This was combat veteran muscle memory. This was someone who'd done this for real, under fire, when mistakes meant body bags. The exercise ended. Instructors called time. Other medics stood around their casualties, looking exhausted and overwhelmed. Sarah was checking her work, making sure each casualty was stable, making sure nothing had been missed. When she finally stood up, her uniform was covered in fake blood. Her face was calm, composed, like she'd just finished routine paperwork instead of a high-stress simulation. Dr. Walsh approached her. "That was exceptional work, Martinez. Where did you learn to triage that quickly?" Sarah wiped fake blood from her hands. "Experience, ma'am. A lot of experience," but there was something in her voice, a heaviness, like each piece of that experience had cost more than anyone should pay. "How many real casualties have you treated, Sarah?" The use of her first name was deliberate, personal. Sarah hesitated, then answered honestly. 216, ma'am. "I've lost 43. The number hung in the air like smoke. 216 soldiers had depended on Sarah's skills to stay alive. 43 hadn't made it, not because Sarah failed, but because war doesn't care about skill. Sometimes bullets win. Sometimes bombs win. Sometimes you do everything right and people still die. Dr. Walsh studied Sarah's young face, trying to reconcile the numbers with the person standing before her. Every one of those 43 keeps you awake at night, doesn't it? It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am, every single one." That night, Sarah sat in her quarters writing in a worn journal. Names filled the pages. Ranks, dates, circumstances, every soldier she'd lost. She wrote about them because remembering hurt, and she needed to hurt, needed to carry their weight, because forgetting them would mean their deaths meant nothing, would mean all that blood, all that screaming, all those last words were just noise that faded away. Staff Sergeant Wilson, IED blast, bled out internally before I could get to him. I chose to treat Private First Class Johnson first because his injuries looked worse. I was wrong. Corporal Hayes, gunshot wound to the chest. I sealed it, did everything right, but the bullet had fragmented. Internal damage I couldn't see, couldn't fix. He died holding my hand, asking me to tell his daughter he loved her. Specialist Martinez, no relation, rocket attack, multiple penetrating wounds. I worked on her for 40 minutes, refusing to stop, refusing to accept that she was already gone. Her blood soaked through my uniform, into my skin. I can still feel it sometimes. The journal was filled with stories like this. 43 lives that ended despite Sarah's best efforts. 43 purple hearts that represented failure before they represented courage. Because that's how Sarah saw them, not as honors, but as receipts for the price she'd paid, the people she couldn't save, the families she destroyed with the words "I'm sorry, but we did everything we could." But she'd never told anyone about the journal, never shared the weight she carried, because admitting how much it hurt meant admitting she might not be strong enough to do it again, and the army needed medics. Soldiers needed someone who could function when everything went wrong, someone who could push through the trauma and keep working, keep saving lives, even when doing so meant adding more names to the list, more ghosts to her collection, more reasons to stay awake at night. A knock at the door interrupted her writing. Sarah quickly closed the journal, slid it under her pillow. "Come in." Private Jackson entered, looking uncertain. "Ma'am, I wanted to apologize for the other day, for doubting you." Sarah shook her head. "You don't need to apologize for being skeptical. I'd doubt me too if I saw me for the first time, but you earned respect out there, ma'am. The march, the medical exercise, everyone's talking about it." Sarah smiled sadly. "Respect is temporary, Private. I'll have to earn it again at the next base. And the one after that. That's just how it works when you don't look like what people expect." Jackson shifted his weight. "Can I ask you something, ma'am? If it's not too personal." Sarah nodded. "What's it like, Combat, I mean, real combat, not the exercises. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering how to answer, how to describe something that couldn't truly be understood without experiencing it. It's loud, she finally said, so loud you can't think, can't hear yourself. Your training takes over because your mind can't process everything at once. And then after. When it's quiet again, that's when it really hits you. What you saw, what you did, what you couldn't do. Is it true you've been wounded 5 times? Jackson asked. Sarah pulled up her left sleeve, revealed a scar running from her shoulder to her elbow, shrapnel from a mortar round in Kandahar. She lifted her shirt slightly, showed another scar on her side, bullet fragment, Fallujah, didn't hit anything vital but hurt like hell. She turned around, pulled her hair aside, showed a line across the back of her neck. RPG explosion, Helmand Province. I was lucky. 3 inches lower and I wouldn't be here. Jackson stared at the scars, physical proof of what Sarah's young face tried to hide. How do you keep going back, after all that, after getting hurt, after losing people? How do you keep doing it? Sarah let her sleeve fall back into place. Because soldiers need medics who know what real combat is like, who won't freeze when things go bad, who understand that saving lives isn't clean or easy or glamorous. It's blood and chaos and making impossible decisions in seconds. And if I don't go back, who will? Some kid fresh out of training who's never seen real violence. Someone who will hesitate when hesitating means death. But doesn't it scare you? Jackson asked quietly. Terrifies me, Sarah admitted, every single time, but fear is just information. It tells you the stakes are high, that what you're doing matters. The trick is not letting fear stop you from doing what needs to be done. Jackson nodded slowly, processing. Thank you for being honest, ma'am. Most people tell us war stories that make it sound exciting, like an action movie. You make it sound real, because it is real, Sarah said. And pretending otherwise does everyone a disservice. After Jackson left, Sarah pulled out her journal again, but she didn't write. She just stared at the names, wondering which one she'd add next, because there would be more. There were always more. That was the truth nobody wanted to talk about. The reality that didn't fit into recruitment posters or heroic narratives. Some people survived, some people didn't, and the ones who tried to save them carried both groups forever. Would anyone see the explosion coming before it was too late? 3 weeks into her assignment at Fort Campbell, Sarah had settled into a routine. Morning runs, training exercises, medical drills. She kept to herself mostly. Polite but distant, professional but not personal. It was safer that way. Less complicated, but Dr. Walsh had other plans. She'd been watching Sarah closely, seeing potential that extended beyond standard medical duties. Potential that was being wasted by Sarah's self-imposed isolation. Martinez, Dr. Walsh called after a particularly intense training session. My office. Now, Sarah followed her to the medical building, wondering if she'd done something wrong, wondering if her past was about to catch up with her again. Dr. Walsh closed the door behind them, gestured for Sarah to sit. How long are you planning to hide, Sarah? The question caught her off guard. I'm not hiding, ma'am. I'm just doing my job. You're doing more than your job. You're excelling. But you're also keeping everyone at arm's length. Why? Sarah looked down at her hands. Because getting close to people means it hurts more when they die, ma'am. And in my experience, people die. Dr. Walsh leaned forward. So your solution is to never connect with anyone, to spend your entire career alone. It's worked so far, Sarah said quietly. Has it? Dr. Walsh asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, and that weight is crushing you. Sarah felt tears threatening, pushed them back. I lost 43 soldiers, ma'am, 43 people I tried to save. I can name every one of them, tell you how they died, what their last words were, how their blood felt on my hands, so forgive me if I'm not interested in adding more names to that list. Dr. Walsh was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled out a file from her desk. I've been reviewing your medical history, your diplomas, your performance records. Do you know what I see? What do you see, ma'am? Someone with post-traumatic stress who's never received proper treatment. Someone who's been running on adrenaline and guilt for so long they've forgotten how to function any other way. Sarah's jaw tightened. I function fine, ma'am. Do you? Dr. Walsh asked. Because your sleep records show chronic insomnia. Your weight suggests you're not eating properly, and your psychological evaluations indicate significant emotional distress that you're managing through avoidance and isolation. That's not functioning, that's surviving, and there's a difference. What do you want from me, ma'am? Sarah asked, frustration creeping into her voice. I want you to talk to someone, a therapist, a counselor, someone trained to help soldiers process trauma. I want you to stop treating every loss like it was your personal failure. And I want you to understand that you can't save everyone, but destroying yourself trying won't honor the ones you couldn't save. Sarah stood abruptly. With all due respect, ma'am, I've heard this speech before, multiple times from multiple officers, and it never changes anything because they don't understand. They weren't there. They didn't see what I saw, didn't hold dying soldiers who were begging for their mothers, didn't promise to deliver messages to families knowing those promises were just lies to make someone's last moments less terrifying. Dr. Walsh stood too, meeting Sarah's eyes directly. You're right, I wasn't there. I can't know exactly what you experienced, but I've treated enough combat veterans to recognize when someone is drowning. And Sarah, you're drowning. You're just so good at hiding it that nobody else notices. Words hit harder than Sarah expected, because they were true. She was drowning, had been drowning for years. Every deployment pulled her deeper, every loss added weight. Every nightmare reminded her that she was still here while so many others weren't. And she had no idea how to stop, how to let go, how to forgive herself for being alive. I don't know how to let it go, Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know how to move forward when they can't. You start by accepting that you did your best. That sometimes your best isn't enough. And that's not a failure. That's just the reality of combat medicine. Sarah sank back into her chair, feeling exhausted, feeling exposed. For the first time in years, her carefully maintained walls were crumbling, and she didn't have the energy to rebuild them. Dr. Walsh sat beside her, put a hand on her shoulder. I'm going to assign you to weekly counseling sessions, non-negotiable, and I'm going to reduce your training schedule temporarily so you have time to actually process what you've been through. You're also going to start attending the veteran support group that meets Thursday evenings. Sarah wiped her eyes. What if talking about it makes it worse? What if remembering makes it harder to function? What if not talking about it keeps you trapped forever? Dr. Walsh countered. What if the weight you're carrying is exactly what's preventing you from becoming the medic you could be, the teacher you could be, the person you deserve to be? Sarah had no answer for that, so she just nodded, accepting help for the first time since she'd enlisted, accepting that maybe she couldn't do this alone anymore. Maybe carrying 43 names in silence wasn't strength. Maybe it was just slow suicide. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, I'll try. The first therapy session was harder than Sarah expected. The counselor, a retired Army major named Dr. Phillips, had kind eyes and a direct approach that left little room for deflection. Tell me about your first deployment, Sarah, straight to business. No warm-up, no gentle lead-in. Sarah appreciated that. I was 19, fresh out of advanced medical training, confident, scared, excited, all of it at once. I thought I was ready. Thought my training had prepared me for everything. I was wrong. Dr. Phillips made a note. What happened that changed your mind? My first casualty, second day in country, convoy hit an IED, multiple wounded. I ran toward the smoking vehicles thinking I knew what to do, thinking my training would kick in, but nothing prepared me for the reality, the smell, the sounds, the way bodies break when metal tears through them. There was a young soldier, Specialist Rodriguez, 20 years old, married, baby on the way. He was conscious when I reached him, talking, apologizing for bleeding, apologizing for getting hurt, like it was his fault someone planted a bomb. Sarah's voice caught. She took a breath. Continued. I tried everything, applied pressure, used quick clot, called for a medevac, but the damage was too extensive. Internal bleeding I couldn't reach, couldn't stop. He died looking at me, trusting me, believing I could save him, and I couldn't. How did that make you feel? Dr. Phillips asked. Like a fraud, like all my training was worthless, like I had no business wearing the uniform. Sarah paused, then added quietly, like I'd let him down in the worst possible way. Did you let him down? Dr. Phillips asked. Sarah looked up sharply. Yes, I should have done more, should have been faster, better, more skilled. Dr. Phillips leaned forward, or maybe his injuries were unsurvivable. Maybe no medic in the world could have saved him. Did that possibility ever occur to you? No. Because accepting that means accepting that some people die regardless of what I do. And if that's true, then what's the point? What's the point of trying? The point is that you save the ones you can save, Dr. Phillips said gently, and you give dignity and comfort to the ones you can't. That's not failure, that's humanity. But it feels like failure, every single time. Then we need to work on separating feelings from facts, because your feelings are lying to you. Your feelings are telling you that every loss is your fault, when the truth is that you've saved 216 soldiers. 216 families still have their loved ones because of your skill, your dedication, your willingness to run toward danger when everyone else was running away. Sarah sat with that, trying to let it sink in, trying to believe it. 216 lives saved. It should have felt like victory, should have felt like redemption. But all she could think about were the 43 who didn't make it. We're going to work on reframing your trauma, Dr. Phillips continued. You've been carrying these losses as evidence of your inadequacy. Instead, we're going to help you see them as evidence of impossible circumstances that you navigated as well as anyone could. It's going to take time. It's going to be uncomfortable. But it's necessary if you want to move forward instead of staying trapped in guilt. Over the following weeks, Sarah attended therapy sessions and veteran support groups, heard other soldiers share their stories, their guilt, their nightmares, their struggles with coming home, and slowly, very slowly, she began to realize she wasn't alone, that the weight she'd been carrying in isolation was a weight shared by thousands of veterans, that shame and guilt were common responses to trauma, that feeling like a failure didn't mean she actually was one. In the support group one evening, a sergeant named Blackwell shared his story. He'd lost half his squad in an ambush, blamed himself for not seeing it coming, for not protecting them better. I see their faces every night, he said, every time I close my eyes, and I ask myself why I survived when they didn't. What made me more deserving of life than them? The answer is nothing. I wasn't more deserving, I was just lucky. And sometimes that feels worse than dying would have. Sarah found herself speaking for the first time in group. I'm a combat medic. I've treated over 200 casualties, lost 43, and for years I've been telling myself that those 43 deaths were my fault, that if I'd been better, faster, more skilled, they'd still be alive. She paused, feeling vulnerable, exposed, but recently someone asked me if maybe their injuries were just unsurvivable, if maybe no medic could have saved them, and I realized I'd never considered that possibility. Because admitting that means admitting I'm not in control. That sometimes people die despite my best efforts, and that terrifies me more than bullets ever did. The room was silent. Then Blackwell spoke. That's the hardest part, isn't it? Accepting that we're not gods, that we can't control everything, that sometimes the universe is just cruel and random and doesn't care how hard we try. Sarah nodded, feeling tears on her cheeks, not bothering to hide them. Yeah, that's the hardest part. After group, Dr. Walsh found Sarah in the parking lot. I heard you spoke tonight. That's good progress. Sarah smiled weakly. Doesn't feel like progress. Feels like falling apart. Sometimes falling apart is the first step to putting yourself back together properly, Dr. Walsh said. You've been holding yourself together with guilt and duty for so long. Maybe it's time to find something more sustainable. What do you suggest? Sarah asked. Purpose, teaching, sharing what you've learned so other medics don't have to learn it the hard way. You have knowledge that could save lives, not just the lives you personally treat, but the lives treated by every medic you train. That's legacy. That's meaning beyond survival. Sarah considered this. She'd never thought of herself as a teacher, never imagined passing on what she'd learned. But maybe Dr. Walsh was right. Maybe the best way to honor the 43 she'd lost was to make sure their deaths taught lessons that could prevent future deaths. Could I make a list of the improvements I'd recommend? Sarah asked. Based on what I learned in the field. You could do better than that, Dr. Walsh said. You could develop a training program, present at medical conferences, write articles, become a voice for combat medics who have been there and understand what real battlefield medicine looks like. Sarah felt something stirring, something that might have been hope. Or maybe just the first crack in the wall she'd built around herself. I don't know if I'm qualified for that. You've treated more combat casualties than most medics will see in their entire careers. You're more qualified than you think. That night Sarah opened her journal, but instead of writing about losses, she wrote about lessons. What she'd learned from each casualty, what she'd do differently, what had worked, what hadn't. She filled pages with technical details, tactical insights, emotional wisdom. And for the first time since she'd started keeping the journal, writing didn't feel like punishment. It felt like purpose. Why did the alarm bells suddenly start ringing? 6 months after arriving at Fort Campbell, Sarah stood in the medical center on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. She was reviewing supply inventories, routine work, mind-numbing work, the kind of work that let her thoughts wander to the training program proposal she'd been developing with Dr. Walsh. But routine has a way of shattering without warning. The base-wide alert system activated. Mass casualty drill. All medical personnel report to emergency stations. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She moved toward the trauma bay, but something felt off. The announcement hadn't followed standard protocol, hadn't specified drill parameters, and through the windows she could see actual emergency vehicles moving with real urgency. This isn't a drill. Dr. Walsh appeared beside her, face grim, training accident, live fire exercise. We have 4 incoming casualties. Critical, Sarah's stomach dropped, but her hands were already moving, checking equipment, preparing station, mental checklist running. The first ambulance arrived within minutes. Medics rushed in carrying a soldier on a stretcher. Corporal Adams, 22 years old, gunshot wound to the abdomen, friendly fire incident. He was conscious, screaming. Sarah moved to him immediately, her hands already assessing, already prioritizing, already calculating survival odds. Adams, I need you to listen to me. Stay with me. I've got you. She cut away his uniform, exposing the wound. Entry wound on the left side, no exit wound, bullet still inside, possible internal damage to organs, possible spinal involvement. She called out orders without looking up. I need blood, type O negative, stat. I need surgical prep. And get me imaging as soon as he's stable enough. Her hands worked with practiced precision, controlling bleeding, starting IV lines, monitoring vitals. This was what she'd trained for, what she'd done hundreds of times, but it never got easier, never stopped feeling like everything depended on these next few minutes. The second casualty arrived, then the third, then the fourth. Suddenly the trauma bay was controlled chaos. Multiple medics working, Dr. Walsh coordinating, Sarah focusing entirely on Adams because he was the most critical, because his blood pressure was dropping, because his pupils were dilating, because every indicator suggested he was dying. Stay with me, Adams, don't you dare leave. She worked faster, more aggressive, pushing the boundaries of protocol because protocol was designed for stable patients. And Adams wasn't stable. He was crashing. His vitals declining despite her efforts, despite the blood, despite everything. Dr. Walsh appeared at her side. Sarah, you need to move to another patient. Let someone else take over here. Sarah ignored her, didn't even acknowledge she'd heard. She was in the zone, that place beyond thought, beyond emotion, where only action existed, where muscle memory and instinct dictated every move. She'd been here before, in dusty Afghan valleys, in Iraqi streets, in places where hesitation meant death. Martinez, that's an order, step back. Sarah's hands kept moving. Dr. Walsh grabbed her shoulder, forced eye contact. Sarah, you've done everything you can. He needs surgery now, and the other casualties need you. Let him go. Those 3 words hit like a physical blow. Let him go. Sarah had heard them too many times, spoken them too many times. They meant accepting defeat, accepting that sometimes trying isn't enough. But every fiber of her being screamed against it, against giving up, against adding another name to her list. I can save him, Sarah said, voice raw, desperate. I know I can. You can't, Dr. Walsh said gently. His injuries are too severe. He needs an operating room, not a trauma bay. And the other soldiers need your skills right now. You have to choose. Sarah looked down at Adams. His face was pale, his breathing shallow, but he was still alive, still fighting, still trusting her to save him. Then she looked at the other casualties, one with a leg wound, serious but not immediately life-threatening, one with shrapnel injuries, painful but survivable, one with a head wound, unconscious but stable. The choice was clear. Adams needed a surgeon. The others needed a medic. And standing here trying to do the impossible was taking time from the ones she could actually help. She stepped back, let another medic take her place, moved to the next patient, but part of her stayed with Adams, monitoring, hopping, praying to God she didn't believe in that he'd make it. The next 2 hours passed in a blur. Sarah treated injuries, stabilized patients, made decisions, moved between casualties with mechanical efficiency. But her mind kept returning to Adams, to the choice she'd made, to the possibility that stepping away meant letting him die. When the trauma bay finally cleared, Dr. Walsh found Sarah standing alone, staring at nothing. Adams is in surgery. They're doing everything they can. Sarah nodded, but didn't speak, didn't trust her voice. You made the right call, Martinez. Staying with him wouldn't have changed his outcome, but it would have negatively impacted the others. How do you know? Sarah finally asked. How do you know staying wouldn't have made the difference? Because I've been doing this for 20 years, Dr. Walsh said, and I know what survivable looks like. Adams's injuries required surgical intervention that you couldn't provide in a trauma bay. Your skills were needed elsewhere. You made the rational, professional decision. But it doesn't feel rational, Sarah said quietly. It feels like I abandoned him, feels like I gave up. That's your trauma talking. Your guilt, your fear of adding another loss to your count. But you didn't abandon him. You recognized the limits of what you could provide and made sure he got what he needed while ensuring the other casualties received proper care. That's not failure. That's good medicine. Sarah wanted to believe her, wanted to accept that she'd done the right thing, but the doubt was there, would always be there, because that's what combat medicine did. It forced impossible choices, and then made you live with the consequences. 2 days later, Sarah visited Adams in recovery. He was pale, weak, but alive. The surgery had been successful, the bullet removed, the internal damage repaired. He'd have a long recovery ahead, but he'd survive. Martinez, he said when he saw her, his voice hoarse. They told me you kept me alive until I got to surgery. Sarah shook her head. I just did my job. You did more than that. The surgeon said I would have died in the trauma bay if you hadn't controlled the bleeding. Said your work bought me the time I needed. Sarah felt something loosening in her chest, some of the guilt easing, but not all of it, never all of it. I'm glad you made it, Corporal, she said simply. But she knew that for every story like Adams's, there were others like Staff Sergeant Wilson. Cases where she'd done everything right and people still died. The difference was luck, timing, the angle of a bullet. And accepting that randomness meant accepting that she wasn't in control, would never be in control, could only do her best and hope it was enough. Over the following weeks, Sarah continued therapy, continued writing, continued developing her training program, and slowly, very slowly, she began to separate her identity from her guilt, began to see herself as something other than a collection of failures. Dr. Phillips helped her understand that survivor's guilt was normal, that feeling responsible for things beyond her control was a natural response to trauma, but natural didn't mean healthy. And healing meant learning to carry loss without letting it define her. In one particularly difficult session, Dr. Phillips asked Sarah to write letters to the soldiers she'd lost, not to send, just to say what she'd never had the chance to say. Sarah resisted at first, thought it was pointless, morbid, but she eventually agreed, and what poured out surprised her. Letters full of apologies, but also letters full of gratitude, because each soldier had taught her something. Each loss had made her better at saving the next person. She wrote to Staff Sergeant Wilson, told him how his death had taught her to look for signs of internal bleeding, how that knowledge had saved at least a dozen lives since. She wrote to Corporal Hayes, told him how his fragmented bullet injury had changed how she assessed chest wounds, how she now checked for hidden damage instead of assuming the obvious was everything. She wrote to all 43, and with each letter something shifted. The guilt didn't disappear, but it transformed, became something more like responsibility, like obligation. to use what they taught her, to honor their sacrifice by being better, by teaching others, by making sure their deaths weren't meaningless. When she finished the last letter, Sarah felt lighter, not healed, not whole, but maybe on the path toward both. She showed the letters to Dr. Phillips, who read them with quiet attention. "This is good work, Sarah. You're starting to see your losses as teachers instead of failures. That's significant progress." "But I still see their faces," Sarah admitted. "Still hear their voices, still wake up at night remembering." "You always will," Dr. Phillips said. "Trauma doesn't disappear. It just becomes something you live with instead of something that lives through you. The nightmares may never fully stop, but they'll lose their power over you. They'll become memories instead of active wounds." Sarah wasn't sure she believed that, but she wanted to imagine a future where she could sleep through the night, where thinking about her deployments didn't trigger panic, where she could talk about what she'd experienced without feeling like she was drowning. That future felt impossibly far away, but maybe it was possible. Maybe healing was real. Maybe she deserved it. How does someone rewrite their own story? 8 months after arriving at Fort Campbell, Sarah stood in front of 40 military medics teaching an advanced trauma care course. Her voice was steady. Her examples were drawn from real experience. Her teaching style was direct but compassionate. She didn't hide from the hard truths, didn't sugarcoat the reality of combat medicine. But she also offered hope, offered practical skills, offered the wisdom earned through years of impossible situations. "This is the scenario where most medics make a critical mistake," Sarah explained. "Multiple casualties, limited resources. You want to treat everyone, but trying to save everyone means you might save no one. Triage isn't about giving up on people. It's about being honest about what's possible and directing your efforts where they'll have the greatest impact." She clicked to the next slide, showing a real case from her third deployment. This soldier had a traumatic amputation. Another had a sucking chest wound. Another had a head injury. Standard protocol says you treat based on injury severity, but in this case the amputation patient was conscious, alert. His bleeding was controlled with a tourniquet. The chest wound patient was unconscious, critical, but I made a judgment call. I spent 3 minutes with the amputation patient, ensuring his tourniquet was secure, ensuring he could monitor himself. Then I gave him a job. Watch your buddy with the head injury. Call me immediately if his condition changes. And I focused entirely on the chest wound patient. "Why did you do that?" one of the students asked. "Because I needed to multiply my effectiveness," Sarah explained. "The amputation patient was stable and conscious. By giving him a task, I effectively had 2 medics working instead of 1. And the chest wound patient needed immediate intervention that I couldn't delegate. This approach kept all 3 alive until the medevac arrived. But it only worked because I accurately assessed who could help me and who needed help." A hand went up in the back. "What if you'd been wrong? What if the amputation patient had deteriorated while you were busy with the chest wound?" "Then I would have lost him," Sarah said honestly, "and I would have carried that loss, added it to the others I carry. But I made the best decision I could with the information I had. And sometimes that's all you can do. Combat medicine isn't about perfection. It's about maximizing survival rates while accepting that you can't save everyone." The room was silent. These medics had read textbooks, practiced in simulations. But Sarah was offering something different, real wisdom from real combat. The kind of knowledge that couldn't be taught in classrooms, only earned in blood. After class, several students approached with questions. A young sergeant named Peterson asked about dealing with grief. "How do you handle it, ma'am? When you lose someone despite doing everything right?" "You give yourself permission to feel it," Sarah said. "You acknowledge the loss. You honor them by learning from what happened. And you keep going because other people need your skills. It's not easy. It never gets easy, but it becomes manageable." Another student, Specialist Lee, asked about fear. "Do you still get scared?" Every time, Sarah admitted. "Fear is information. It tells you the situation is serious. The trick is not letting it paralyze you. Use it. Let it sharpen your focus, but don't let it control your actions." "What about nightmares?" Lee asked quietly. Sarah recognized the real question behind the question. This soldier was already struggling, already carrying trauma. They don't go away, Sarah said gently, but they become less frequent, less intense. Get professional help. Talk to someone. Don't try to carry it alone like I did. It took me 8 years to figure that out. Don't make the same mistake. Over the following months, Sarah's reputation as an instructor grew. She was asked to present at military medical conferences, write articles for professional journals, develop training protocols for combat medics across all branches. Her work was changing how the military approached battlefield medicine, saving lives through education rather than just direct intervention. But the real transformation was internal. Sarah was finally learning to forgive herself, not for failing, but for being human, for having limits, for not being able to save everyone no matter how hard she tried. Dr. Walsh noticed the change during one of their regular meetings. "You're different," she observed. "Lighter somehow." Sarah smiled. "I'm learning that my worst moments don't have to define me, that I can be both someone who's lost people and someone who's saved people. That those aren't contradictory. They're just different parts of the same story." "That's exactly right," Dr. Walsh said. "And speaking of your story, Colonel Hayes from the Army Medical Command has been asking about you. He's interested in your work, wants to discuss a possible promotion." "What kind of promotion?" Sarah asked warily. "Direct commission to captain, assignment as the Army's chief instructor for combat medicine. It would mean leaving hands-on patient care for administrative and teaching duties." Sarah sat with that. Part of her resisted, worried that leaving direct care meant abandoning her purpose. But another part recognized the opportunity. She could save dozens of lives as a medic, but as a teacher she could save hundreds, thousands. Every medic she trained would carry her lessons into the field, would make better decisions because of what she taught them, would save lives she'd never personally touch. "That's legacy," Sarah said quietly. "That's meaning beyond just survival." Dr. Walsh nodded. "You've come a long way from the scared young woman who arrived at Fort Campbell trying to hide from her past." Sarah thought about that, about the person she'd been, carrying guilt like armor, hiding behind competence, afraid to let anyone see her struggles. That woman seemed like a stranger now. "I'm not sure I was hiding from my past," Sarah said. "I think I was hiding from myself, from admitting that I was hurt, that I needed help. That being strong didn't mean suffering in silence." "And now?" Dr. Walsh asked. "Now I know that strength is asking for help when you need it, that vulnerability isn't weakness, that sharing my story might help someone else avoid my mistakes." 3 weeks later, Sarah stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., addressing military medical professionals from around the country. Her presentation was titled "Surviving to Serve: Learning from Loss in Combat Medicine." She started with her own story, not hiding from it, not minimizing it, but owning it. 10 years ago, I enlisted as a combat medic. Young, idealistic, convinced I could save everyone. Over 5 deployments, I treated 216 casualties. I lost 43. For years, I carried those 43 as proof of my failure, as evidence that I wasn't good enough, that I'd let people down, that I didn't deserve the decorations I'd earned. She paused, let the weight of that admission settle. "But I've learned that I was wrong, not because those deaths didn't matter, they mattered more than anything, but because I was framing them incorrectly. They weren't failures. They were impossible situations where I did everything I could, and the real failure would have been letting their deaths teach me nothing, letting their sacrifice be meaningless. Instead, each loss taught me lessons that helped me save others. Staff Sergeant Wilson's death taught me to look for internal bleeding. Corporal Hayes taught me about fragmented bullets and hidden damage. Specialist Martinez taught me the limits of persistence and the importance of accepting when someone is beyond saving." The audience was completely silent, every eye fixed on Sarah. She was offering something rare, honest vulnerability from a combat veteran. Most soldiers hid their pain, projected strength, maintained the warrior facade, but Sarah was doing the opposite, showing her wounds, admitting her struggles, and in doing so giving permission for others to do the same. "I'm not here to tell you that combat medicine is easy," Sarah continued, "or that you won't lose people. You will, and it will devastate you. But I'm here to tell you that those losses don't have to destroy you, that you can carry grief without letting it consume you, that you can honor the dead by using what they taught you to save the living. She clicked to her next slide. Practical protocols developed from painful experience. This is what I've learned, what I want to share with you, so that the next generation of medics enters combat better prepared than I was, so that fewer of them have to learn these lessons the hard way, so that maybe, just maybe, we can save a few more lives and lose a few fewer. After the presentation, people approached Sarah with tears in their eyes, thanking her for her honesty, for her courage, for giving voice to struggles they'd been carrying silently. A Navy medic shook her hand and said, "You've given me permission to stop punishing myself. Thank you." An Air Force trauma surgeon hugged her and whispered, "I've been drowning for 3 years. Didn't know how to ask for help. Now I do." But the most meaningful moment came from a young Army medic, barely 19 years old. She approached Sarah with obvious nervousness. "Ma'am, I deploy in 2 weeks, first time. I'm terrified I won't be good enough, that I'll freeze, that I'll let people die." Sarah saw herself in this young woman, saw the fear, the determination, the desperate desire to be worthy of the responsibility. "What's your name?" "Airman Peterson, ma'am." Sarah studied her face. "Peterson, can I tell you something that might help? Being scared means you understand the responsibility. The medics who worry about being good enough usually are. The ones who think they know everything are the dangerous ones." She handed Peterson her business card. "When you get back from deployment, come find me. We'll talk about whatever you've experienced. Deal?" "Yes, ma'am, thank you." After the conference, Sarah walked along the Potomac River with Dr. Walsh. Early evening air was crisp. City lights reflected off dark water. "You've come a long way from the scared young woman who arrived at Fort Campbell," Dr. Walsh observed. "I wasn't scared of the job," Sarah replied. "I was scared of people knowing who I really was. I thought if they knew about my failures, they'd lose faith in me. And now I know that hiding our experiences doesn't protect anyone. Those 43 soldiers I lost taught me lessons that have helped me save dozens more. Their deaths meant something if I use what I learned to help others." They walked in comfortable silence. Then Dr. Walsh asked, "Have you given any thought to Colonel Hayes's proposal?" Sarah had been avoiding the decision, but watching those medics today, seeing how her story affected them, she knew what she had to do. "I'm ready," Sarah said, "ready to accept the promotion, ready to teach, ready to make sure the next generation of medics has better tools and better training than I did. That's what will honor the people I lost, not hiding from what happened, but using it to save others." Dr. Walsh smiled. "The Army is lucky to have you, Captain Martinez." That night, back in her hotel room, Sarah video called her parents for the first time in months. Her father answered, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "There's my little soldier. Dad, I'm 29 years old and a warrant officer. I think we can drop the little part." Her mother appeared on screen, tears already forming. "Sarah, we watched your presentation online. We're so proud of you. We always knew you were special," her father added, "even when you were trying to convince everyone you weren't." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "I'm sorry I stayed away so long. I didn't know how to talk about what I'd experienced." "You don't have to apologize, sweetheart," her mother said. "We knew you'd find your way eventually. You always were our strongest child, even when you didn't feel strong." After ending the call, Sarah sat by the window, looking out at the nation's capital. Somewhere in the city, politicians made decisions that would send young soldiers into harm's way. Her job was to make sure those soldiers had the best possible chance of coming home alive. She picked up her phone, sent a text to Colonel Hayes. "Sir, I accept the promotion and assignment. When do I start?" His response came within minutes. "Congratulations, Captain Martinez. You start Monday. The Army is lucky to have you." Sarah Martinez had finally learned to carry her 5 Purple Hearts not as badges of failure, but as symbols of courage, sacrifice, and hard-won wisdom. The young woman who had once looked like fresh training had become the teacher who would train the next generation of military medics. Her journey from hiding in shadows to standing in spotlights was complete. But more importantly, her evolution from seeing herself as a failure to understanding herself as a survivor and teacher would help save countless lives in the years to come. The real story behind the decorations was finally being told, and it was a story of triumph over trauma, of finding purpose in pain, of learning that our greatest weaknesses can become our most powerful strengths when we have the courage to share them with others. In the military, as in life, appearances can be deceiving. Sometimes the most experienced warriors are the ones you'd least expect, carrying their battles internally while continuing to fight for others. Sarah Martinez was living proof that heroes come in all sizes, all ages, and sometimes they look exactly like someone who couldn't possibly be a hero at all. But here's what she'd learned, what she wished she could tell her 19-year-old self, what she hoped every young medic would understand before their first deployment. Strength isn't about never breaking, it's about what you build from the broken pieces. Courage isn't about never being afraid, it's about moving forward despite the fear. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.